Today, we have a true literary powerhouse in the Caribbean writing scene, A.K. Herman. This award-winning author has captivated readers with her stunning anthology, The Believers, a collection that delves into the complexities of faith, culture, and the human spirit. With an impressive track record, A.K. Herman has been shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, won second place at the 2011 Small Axe Literary Competition, and is a celebrated voice featured by Bocas Litfest. Her work continues to break boundaries and elevate Caribbean storytelling to new heights. But today isn't just about celebrating her literary brilliance, it's also about building a movement. Our goal, 500 followers in the next 2 months. The best way to make this happen? Supporting Caribbean authors like A.K. Herman, sharing their stories, and amplifying their voices. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's dive into the mind of this extraordinary writer.
Hi, I'm A.K. Herman, a poet and writer born in Scarborough, Tobago. The Believers Stories is my debut story collection. It is literary fiction for teens and adults looking for a refreshing read and compelling characters. In this collection, we encounter predatory pastors, powerful women from Tobago, doomed lovers, babies born in secret, and boys with wings. You can find The Believers at major retailers like Amazon, Kobo Bookshop, Blackwell's Waterstones, and at Paper-Based Bookshop in Trinidad and Tobago.
Greetings, listenership. Welcome to TLC Tropical Literature Creatives, the podcast where we interview authors of Caribbean heritage about themselves and about their literary works. Some of them you've heard of, and some of them you'll be hearing about soon enough. Today we have with us Ms. A.K. Herman, award-winning author of the short story collection, The Believers. Ms. Herman, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed by Tropical Literature Creators.
Anytime. It was a pleasure when you reached out, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
And I'm sure a number of persons are here looking forward to hearing your insights as well. But before we go any further, there's a scenario I usually give to persons who I'm featuring on the podcast. And the scenario is this. Imagine that you're meeting someone who's coming to Trinidad and Tobago for the very first time, and you meet them at the airport, and they ask you, what should they try as they're here in Trinidad and Tobago? What food should they try? What place should they visit? What would you recommend to them?
I would recommend they go to Tobago. I would say, get on one of those, local flights. And you get off in Crown Point Airport and, find your way to Scarborough, get yourself some good food and check out the beaches at Pigeon Point. Just really go to Tobago and really see what they say. Tobago is beautiful, and it will be true when you get there, and you won't regret it. That's what I would say. Get yourself to Tobago. Listen to the people. Have a good time.
Okay, you heard it here yourself, ladies and gentlemen. Get to Tobago. Okay, as we get into the book, your story, your book, in fact, it's filled with a number of interesting stories and interesting characters. But what really motivated you to put these stories together? Is it that you just wanted to showcase your literary works? Is it that you had things that you wanted to get off your chest? Please elaborate.
That's a good question. Many of these stories were written at various times, in my life, so it's basically spans, I think, almost 15 years or so. Just writing stories. Sometimes it starts with just a scene, or like in my mind, someone says something, and next thing you know, I'm developing this story about this person. And as I write, I've been living in the States for just under 20 years, and I think there's the view of people from the Caribbean as people in transit. I was very interested in that idea that we're not necessarily people who come to the States and stay. We go back and forth. We're from all walks of life. Some of us are rich, some of us are poor, and I really wanted to show that sort of more expanded view of people from the Caribbean islands and, the way they think and the way they talk. So I think a lot of it happened organically. It's just one, sometimes it's just one story. I wanted to talk about this role of religion as you're in New York, what becomes of it, or the role of feeling helpless or being wealthy. What does that mean? Or identity, how your identity shifts as you go from place to place. And then, when the idea to try to get these things published, there are other stories that I have, but they're not all in this collection. But these stories really fit together in a way. And some of them, I didn't even think of it that way. There's one set of stories that actually are excerpts from a novel that I'm working on. The novel has shifted since then, but at the time, I wrote this short story in a workshop, and people were like, "You should publish it. It could stand on its own." I was like, I didn't think of that. So I was like, okay. So and then next thing you know, and then also the stories connect with each other in very soft ways, sometimes very strong. Sometimes a
Mhm.
character is born in one but dies in another, or a person passes a person on the street. So these are just little gems that, if you're a careful reader, you will find where people see each other in passing, or they are in the same town. One thing is happening on one end of the town, the other end of town, something else is happening. So they connect together. That's why they're in one collection, I believe. And editors had something to say too, and they agreed. So
No, and I think that just kind of makes it really interesting as well, because as much as they're separate stories, that the characters, I guess, that they're interconnected in these minor ways, just kind of gives it a little. How should I put this, man? Uh, I'm just getting trouble to articulate it at this point, but it's just interesting that they're part of the same interconnected world, and they may not
absolutely,
even see it like that.
absolutely.
Uh, I mean, in doing preparation for this, I came across information that you've been shortlisted by a number of authorities who recognize persons for their literary prowess, and persons at the Commonwealth Short Story. Well, I see that you've been shortlisted by the Commonwealth Short Story Organization, Small Acts Junior Literary Organization, and even the Bocas Lit Fest in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, having received accolades from these organizations, I mean, how has that shaped you as a writer? Has that added to your confidence? And has it, motivated you to just up your game? I mean, how has it?
That's interesting. The thing is that I'm writing because I'm compelled to write. So these stories would have been written anyway in a lot of ways. I
Mm-hmm.
think these accolades are wonderful. They're amazing. They are surprising. And the Bocas 2025, Bocas, Caribbean Literary Prize. That's like unbelievable. I feel like, I mean, Edwidge Danticat is on that list for nonfiction. So I am like 13 books between me and her. So like I'm happy already. Like, you know what I mean? It's really wonderful. But I have more stories to tell. So it doesn't stop anything. You keep going. And the thing about books is that they're funny like that. It was published in 2024, but it's been in the work, and it took almost a year between all the editing and all the everything to get it there. So for the readers, it's like, this is exciting and this is new, and for the writer, it's like, oh my god, there's so many things that I'm working on. So these prizes were helpful. They do support you, and it's like, okay, I'm not doing crazy stuff, because I try to reinvent. I try to, I do have a real sense of what, the Caribbean literature as a canon. You know what I mean? And African literature as a canon, especially West African literature. And I am responding to that, but in my own ways. I think someone said to me once that, I know you've read these things, but I don't see I don't see you using the same tropes. I said, there are new tropes. These tropes have changed. This is way past the post-colonial period. What are we doing now as a people, as we are in transit? And then, just the way that being like ordinary life, that's very much an interest of mine. Having stories have the cadence and the feel of ordinary life, which is unpredictable, which doesn't end neatly. You know what I mean? I have some readers have said that they didn't feel satisfied at the end, and I was like, books are meals in some ways, but maybe you want more, and that's good. Come back. You know what I mean?
No, it's interesting, and I think some of the books that are most memorable are the ones that don't have that ending that's tied up in a neat little bow or something that gives you something to think about, to ponder about. You're there, you're washing your dishes, and you're like, this thing, like, it's on my mind, and it just weighs on you like that. And I guess feedback like that is just, maybe it gives you insight or encouragement as a writer that you did put together a thought-provoking piece.
I would say that.
Of the stories that make up the book, is there anyone that stands out or that is of significance to you personally?
I wouldn't say any one. I mean, they fit together. I think what the stories that I was very interested in, creating and making sure that maybe the most nervous about were the stories set in Tobago, I would say, because two of them are set, and one is in the pre-war period, one is in the post-war period. And then I have an allegorical story, sort of a magical realism, as some people might say, or surrealism, I would say. But So those stories, I think, are things that stood out for me. The idea that I'm wanting to write stories that are set in Tobago and about Tobago, Tobagonian people. So that was really important to me to do that. So I would say they all stand out in some ways, but those are the three, I think, are things that I think would be, that were really important, that I get it out there and get these ideas developed.
As some of the stories that you indicated were set in Tobago, are there persons who go through the book and ask you, tell me about this Tobago place? Because I mean, I haven't heard about it before, but you reference it a lot in your book. Have you gotten any kind of feedback like that?
Not really. The feedback I've gotten most were people were like, wow, I don't think I ever read anything that was set in Tobago. And I think one reviewer said, I'm from Trinidad and Tobago and I don't think I've actually ever read it. Tobago does have a thriving literary scene.
Mm-hmm.
Even I think there is a writers guild that meets regularly, if I'm not mistaken, and there's a person who was shortlisted for the Commonwealth at one point. But just in terms of being, not many. So often they say Trinidad and Tobago, but they mean Trinidad. That has always been sort of like a thought of mine. I've observed that they say it's from Trinidad and Tobago, but often they mean the Big Island. So I'm writing from the small island. So again, writing from the periphery, and recent to the periphery.
I guess they're representing Tobago and stuff as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Your stories explore a number of themes like faith, secrecy, and love in unconventional ways. I mean, these themes that are represented in these stories, are you speaking like from your own experiences or observations, or just like your own imagination?
I mean, I'm a writer. And I've observed that life is very complex. So every story is a mixture of, because you have to convey real feeling. It has to make sense. And it's very important that I write from the point of view of the character. So sometimes I'm writing from the point of view as a person. So say Beatrice. Some of that may have been things that I've heard about, but I have to write it from Beatrice's point of view. What would Beatrice do? Not what would AK do. What would Beatrice do? So that's often this notion of making stories indigenous to the characters who are either telling the story or who the story is about. So in a lot of ways, I would say sometimes my characters surprise me. I was like, I write it and I'm like, oh my, she really said that for true? Oh, wow. She really did say that, like she said that. So because it would be true to who she was or he was at this when I'm writing. So like I said, I'm a writer. I observe people and listen all the time. And sometimes it's a small thing. Something very small. I saw a woman bend her head in front of me and I noticed the hair at the back of her neck had a pattern on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought to myself, like, I'm writing this story about a man who's in love with a woman. And I thought, this is something that he could notice. It's very small. It's very almost insignificant. But if you are in love with someone,
you would notice these things.
Yeah, so I was at the gym. I don't know this woman, but I just looked and I just saw that pattern in the back of it. It was her hair's going down, but then there's suddenly the circular pattern of hair in the back of her neck. And I just thought, perhaps, so that will stick with me. I don't know which story it will come to, but I will write something one day and a lover will speak of the pattern of hairs, the back of a person's neck. So it's like that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, inspiration comes to you in different ways.
And then the story becomes its own and the character becomes its own, and then it changes again when you do a second draft and a third draft, and I multi-draft, fourth draft, you know what I mean? So that's why, yeah.
I mean, it sounds wild, and I think one of the most, I don't want to say maybe entertaining might be the wrong word, but I mean, the fact that sometimes you're not really sure exactly where the characters lead you in your stories is just really interesting. It's like the story is just as much a surprise to you as it is to anyone else.
Absolutely. It really is at times. It sounds crazy, but it is true. The things they do, and I'm very interested in something I call being indigenous to the story. So if you are, I don't know, you're a rural woman in Tobago set in the 1940s, not only do I need to know a bit about the way life was in Tobago, so it does require some research, but the way that you think and the things that you do, the kind of metaphors and comparisons, that you're using as you're talking.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You're not going to compare something to parchment. You're going to compare it to, I don't know, white like farine or
brown paper.
cassava. Yeah, something that you would have there,
At that
because
point
it
in
also
time.
gives a view of the person's worldview of how they see things.
Yeah.
And again, so I try to make it indigenous to the person. Again, what that person does should be believable to the reader as well. So often, readers, I do believe many times, you know how a story is going to end in your soul somewhere, but by the end you're like, and I know she's going to do that. Like you knew it, but we don't know it yet, but it's there. The
Yeah.
ending is already anticipated many times in the very beginning. To
Mm-hmm.
really craft it, you kind of almost, in a lot of ways, know what a story is going to be about in the first 2 paragraphs. You don't have a feel. Something has happened. Somebody's lost something. You know what I mean? And you know what we're going to be doing.
I mean, when you're putting your stories together, is it a matter of you just how should I describe this? Is it like you plan it out, or and the reason I ask this is because, like I say, how do your stories come together? The research that you put into it and the way that the characters are written. Some persons put emphasis on like character building or like you
Yeah.
could say world building, but here it
Yeah.
is. I mean, you're saying that you have to understand the background, and with the background, that dictates certain elements of the
Yeah.
character. And when you have elements of the character, the characters dictate how the stories go, the decisions that they make going forward.
Yes.
So I was just curious as to what is your method for writing?
Depends. Again, many times it just begins with a scene, or I have an idea and I would like to write about a topic or a person. So it's like a person is the first thing. I don't know, a girl is lying in a bed somewhere and she's ill and she hasn't walked in 5 years. Something like that might just come to me, and I have a scene, and I can see it in my mind, like you know what I mean. I can see the person lying there, and it may just be a scene, and we may begin with that scene. That's the first draft. We begin with that scene, and I may be writing it, and I may just write free form, just whatever comes to my mind, and I'm going through the thing. And I may stop and write an outline at the end, at some point, to say, oh, this is where I want this to go. And sometimes I write the entire thing without an outline, more scene after scene, and then that's the first draft, because you can't season something unless you have the pot already started, right? You're adding salt to what you can't decide how much salt it's going to have from. And then that's your first draft, and I may put it down, and then I begin to go in and I begin to look at it. Sometimes I wonder, I wrote this in the first person, maybe I'm like, this doesn't suit this story and let's change it. So I may write the story again in the third person, and then I may change, you know what I mean? So it goes through, depends on the story, because I want to tell it in the way that makes sense. And I can tell if I am bored with it, I believe readers will be bored too. And then sometimes I may go in, and at one point I may put it down again and work on other things and come back. It's like, you know what? This part that's in the middle should be at the top. You know what I mean? Again, you have to have the thing so that you start moving parts around. So it's very, again, organic, depends on the story. Some story I can write it out in the first draft, but still, when I look at it again, I would change it, or I write one story I wrote like 6 times. Different drafts, different points of view, different ways of speaking, especially if I'm trying to write in English Creole. Sometimes I write very deep Creole, but sometimes it's unreadable by a person who's not a native speaker, so I have to find that balance of getting the rhythm of the language, the feel of it, and that takes a couple drafts. And there's a sound draft, a draft when I read it aloud to myself. So it's just a lot of drafts. That's the only thing I would say. A lot of drafts, a lot of points of view, really getting to what is going to make this story the best way. Is the right person telling it? You know what I mean? I'm writing from the son's point of view, and it's like, maybe it might be better if the father tells the story. And then I write, and I was like, oh, there are things that the father would know the son wouldn't, so it's much more interesting. Or maybe it's from 2 points of view. So hard to say what that is. Depends on the story I'm telling, but usually it begins with a scene, a line of dialogue, just something that starts me on this path. You know what I mean? Just starts me on a path.
Okay.
And I take it, I follow it to see where it's going.
No, I mean, you have mentioned some really interesting things there, because when you were talking about the language, how it is that you write heavily in Creole sometimes. The question I had was, how do you balance stuff like that to persons who are from the Caribbean and to persons who are out of the Caribbean? Because I guess at some point in time, the persons from the Caribbean will get it. I mean, when we see it, we know what you're talking about. But to the person on the outside who is interested, it would be kind of hard for them to follow. So I was just curious as to how you strike a balance, between that.
I don't know. I've noticed actually that the world has changed so much since I started writing short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think general even in pop culture, in music, people are much more open than, as they, the mighty shadow used to call them, the soca controllers, the media controllers and the music controllers believed. I mean, I am writing after Rima had Calm Down, which is an international hit. That is all in a pidgin language. I remember seeing a scene on maybe Instagram where he goes to Australia and the people, baby, calm down, and people are singing it in it. Tell me no. People are singing it. So all over the world, in Korea, in whatever it is, So he is singing, you're sweet like Fanta, or doesn't matter where in the world he is. So we are in a post-Rima world. That's how I see it. So I think and also this notion of English Creoles are differ around the world. Of course they do, but there's a lot of resonance on the African continent, whether you're doing West or you're in Kenya. So those people, they read this book and they're like, okay, I get it. I get it. Okay. So I think, but I do find, again, it's not really that, except only if I do try to do that very raw, authentic Creole in small amounts. So it's usually a story that maybe I am the omniscient narrator and the people are speaking. So like that last story where they can, Minanu, Igoteli, make you say so. So I could say that because it's small amounts, but you have to give hints along the way. So the plan is really to have the rhythm of the language, which takes what I call sound edits. And that takes a long time. I have to listen to it. And is it being lost? Because I'm what I would call a hyper-educated person. And I have to remember to write in a certain way, whether the verbs are being conjugated. But I think more people, because my editors, she's British, another one is American, and they were fine. You know what I mean? And any comments they have, less about, really to make it consistent. That was the biggest issue in the editing. But I mean, we have Burna Boy singing. We have, what's his name? Marshall Montano is international soca, right now the king of soca. And he is playing into Japanese audiences. He's at Madison Square Garden with all kinds of people. So I think we're past that stage where people are not understanding. Again, we are in Rima has, you know what I mean? And he is singing the way he wants to sing in his voice. And lots of other people are singing this way. And people understand it because it's a feeling, you know what I mean? So that's what I would say. So I will continue to write like this because there's sometimes when I try to tell it another way, sometimes it works, and another time I feel far from the story. I can't feel it. I can't feel the person. And I feel like I am looking at them instead of looking through them. You know what I mean? So I'm too omniscient. I'm too far above in heaven, looking down on this person, doing these things in the story. And I want to be closer to them so the reader can hear and see how they feel and smell the thing that they are smelling and have that feeling and have their heart broken as their heart is broken at the same time. And that would determine the voice. And then one voice works, another one doesn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I gotta appreciate your intent to feel a level of connection with your characters because, like you said, I mean, once you speak to you want the person to read the content to feel what they feel and the lengths that you're going to. I mean, we can appreciate that reading it out loud, going through a series of editors. So yeah, we can appreciate the effort that you're going to have this work brought to us like this. I mean, seeing that you've had, you mentioned that one of your editors was British, one of your editors was from the States as well. Were there times where there was one of the things that you said is that the advice that they gave was to be consistent. Were there times when it is that they went into your work and they said something that, you didn't really fully, appreciate at that point in time, but later on, when it is that you were going through with the work that you say, okay, I see what they're saying and I can appreciate what they're saying right now?
Yeah, I mean, there is editors sometimes say things and I may say, no, this has to go. But in all, I would say there were a couple of things that I wanted to leave in and they were like, my experience, you should take this out. And I thought about it. And there were one or two things that I did take out because it made sense to take it out at that time. I think I had probably more, I guess, pushback as if like in writing workshops sometimes, depending on who the audience is, they, you know, say they don't understand or they used to have a glossary and things like that. And I don't do that. Again, I don't need it. Rima is singing Calm Down to the world. I
Mm-hmm.
could sing it, you know.
No, I was going to ask that question as well because I've come across one or two books where there are glossaries, and what you're saying also does make sense because I guess where the world is right now, social media and globalization. I mean, I could say what I'm saying now, and persons would, if it is they don't get it, there's enough media around that they would be able to pick up and be able to relate to what it is I'm saying.
Absolutely. They should Google it. It's so easy. Google, you can find Trinidadian blogs on online that tell
Yeah.
you how to pronounce certain things. People, I mean, even I, when I'm looking at pronunciation, you can go on to linguists who have Facebook pages and read things out to you. I mean, there's so much out there. You just have to, it's for the looking, for the finding. Yeah.
A lot of, again, going back to your work, it's a collection of short stories. When it is that your work was coming together, um, did you have like don't say limits, parameters for yourself? For example, word counts of like say 200 words, 5 pages, or stuff like that? Or is it that you just wrote and
Just
however
wrote. However it come out, like I just wrote it because that's the story that I have to tell. I have a story that's 2 pages long, but I also have stories that are 8, 9, 10 pages long. And I mean, editors and publishers think about things like, you know, what's a short story collection, which is about 50,000 words. I'm at 47,000. So that's just sort of like your average sort of collection to go through very fast.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because then you're going into something else. A short story collection, except if there are some like Nebula Awards and these science fiction awards where they do package everything. There are 20 stories in there. It's a good 1,000 words thick. But for this kind of thing by a single author, you know, 47 to 50,000 words is pretty your average. And then they fit together also. The stories fit together in a way. Yeah.
As you've had a series of like short stories, this book, The Believers, is it your first published work, or have you done any other books outside of this?
First published work as a writer of fiction, of literary fiction. I'm in my regular life, I've done textbooks and things like that for children and teachers and things like that. So I've published other things before. That's more very much hard research, pedagogical, approaches and things like that. And works, things for teachers. So I've published things before, but this is my first literary work.
I mean, I have to ask, is this different from the other stuff that was published before? Was the process longer? Was it more rigorous? I mean, in terms of the other stuff that you did before, you mentioned it was just research, facts, etc. As this was more of a creative project, was it different?
They're different in that, I mean, in both of them, my goal is to be innovative, to grab people's attention. Textbooks, how can you get someone to sort of really dig into this book and think about, you have to know their school standards and stuff like that. So it does require a lot of information. But I still think even writing requires information, requires you to understand or even be able to tap into feelings, to emotion in order to express something. They're different in some ways. What the editor is doing in one type of genre is different. But this one, I think, in both of them, the goal is to also inspire, to be innovative. Again, there's a lot of research about culture and history for writing of the books, but also for the short story collection, but also research on how people speak, just really getting that syntax down, you know what I mean? And how do you make it seem natural in the book rather than making it seem like you did a whole bunch of research. Writing from a point of someone who knows. So they're different in some ways, but in a lot of ways, I'm the same person. So I'm interested in being inspirational, being innovative. What is innovative about fiction? Also, a lot of the things about the story collection is that if there's a letter or a notice or something, I give it to you on the page to read, like for yourself. You know what I mean? Somebody sends an email. I don't I don't give you a summation. Read it for yourself and figure out for yourself what you think it means. And that's a thing that I do like to do. Just give you things right there You know what I mean? You know, I tell you, there was an obituary. There it is on the page. Wow. Let me see, you know what I mean? Let me read it. Read it for yourself. Oh, that's what it say, boy. Wait, you know. So it's like, so just things that I consider again inspirational, innovative, and telling this story. I think in only the way that I and my character can tell it. And they will do things that are not part of kind of the literary genre. We're just gonna do we're gonna do what seems natural to this story, if that's helpful. They're different and they're similar, but I am the same person, so I want to inspire. I want to challenge. I want to do something new. I want to say something that maybe has not been said. I want to speak for people who have not been spoken. I spoken for. I want to write from the point of view of rural women in Tobago in the 1940s. That's what I want to. That's what I want to do. I don't know who's writing from that point of view, but I am. You know what I mean? I want people to know that she's no joke, you know, in a very serious way, if that's helpful.
Okay, it is. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, you described yourself previously as like a hike back or an academic. I mean, getting this book out would have required you probably, for want of a better term, changing shoes. You would have had to probably be a marketer, a promoter to get your book out there. You see that reaction there? That was the reaction I was aiming for.
Well,
Tell the story. Tell the story.
it was a lot of work. A lot of work to, again, just the work of coming home and you have your draft that the editor has looked at, and you have your regular day job and you have to come home at night and you have to edit these because it's due by a certain day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then you correct them, they look at it again, and then let's pick the book cover, and you know what I mean, and all that kind of stuff. So I think, but I've had some really interesting things that happen that were not intentional, you know. So you do the usual good reads and things like that, but you don't do these things. The readers do. Readers read the book and put it on Goodreads for you. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. I would say it's a lot of work to get a book off the ground after that, for that draft.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on a novel now. I can't even imagine how much work that's going to be because it's like, I don't know, maybe 100,000 words. That's a lot. That's double the size or maybe triple the size of the short story collection. So I think there were some things that I learned that I will do differently this time, which is really, be on the ball with the editing. Like really, they say it's due, and just do it by that time. Don't wait. Don't need to leave it to sit. But it's a lot of work to do that. And I mean, there's only so much time you have, and a lot of marketing happens not by you but influencers and stuff, and that stuff takes lots of money. This is first book, small publishing company. It doesn't have, but a lot of things happen very surreptitiously, like being nominated for this prize. That's really major. That's wonderful,
Yeah.
One of the first readings I did was in Trinidad and Tobago at the Paper Base bookshop. Shout out to Paper Base. And people came to see, and the book was sold out. We did 15 copies. So it just was like, heartwarming things. Or Goodreads editors did it as a pick for December, like random stuff. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, I didn't do any of this. This just happened. Somebody else sent me another list. Oh, I just added you to this list. Or people added to a blog. You know what I mean? So there's just some love that's been happening that I really appreciate, that people are sort of, getting into this and saying, I like this thing, or what is this thing that this person is trying to do here? Or they just have really strong opinions about it, which I think is also good,
Look, it's a collection of short stories, and if it is that they were to be adapted into a film, any one of them, which one would you recommend?
Yeah. I mean, the stuff there, they're very... It's interesting. I think maybe Love with Beatrice. It's because she's so... I don't know if people see people like her on film. Not just as I think people don't really see her in print. To see her. And I would say maybe Inside. Which are interesting stories that people either love or hate immediately. And I would say largely, even when I was workshopping them, the women that I have in my stories, people do expect women in literature still to be nice, and likable and good, and be on the straight and narrow. When they don't, even other women don't, they can't stand it. They don't want to read about people like that. So that's what I would say.
Okay, okay. I mean, obviously, this isn't your first interview. If it is that you were to look back on some of the interviews that you would have had with other persons, what question do you wish persons interviewing you would ask that they usually don't?
Yes, they usually don't. It's tough. I mean, I think it's okay. It all depends on what every interviewer just sort of, it's like everything. People come to it with who they are and what they so everybody has a different angle every time they interview you. I would say at the beginning of every story there is a quote by a character that you're about to meet, and I think I sometimes wish interviewers would ask me about that. What am I trying to do? Um, and what I am trying to do is expand this notion of the world of literature, the world I'm building, because the story itself is expanded by these quotes, because it's a character you haven't met yet, and it tells you something about that person, which adds an additional context if you see them together and then you see them as a whole. So I think maybe if if interviewers would ask me, they're a minor thing, but they're really important for what it is I'm trying to do with this, what do you call it? This medium of words. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. I mean, your book is comprised of several stories. If it is that, you could recommend one story to persons. I mean, I asked you about the film before, but if, there's another story that you would recommend to persons that they would read first, that would give them perspective on the book, which one would you recommend to them?
Perspective on the book. That's interesting. I think they're ordered in a way that I believe gives perspective on the book, where you begin with the title story, The Believers, which kind of gives you perspective on the book. I think that would be a great story to read first if you had to. But I think overall for readers, I would say Exile would be the story that I would ask people to read, because it's a story that is in Exile for me is my answer to Naipaul's story, which the name escapes me now. Wait a minute, I have to remember. This is very important. Not Biswas, but there's what's the story? The one where he's in England and there's a lot of rain and he's working on a book. The Enigma of Arrival. So Exile is my answer to the Enigma of Arrival. So it's called Exile. Because I mean, there's some parts that are very similar. The idea where the person is writing, she's writing a journal, and it begins with rain as well, just as the Enigma of Arrival begins with rain. So I wanted to consider this notion of the new exile, the new being in another part of the world, not England as it was in those days, but in the United States, in Brooklyn, and to be really thinking about literature itself as a framework for coming of age. So in a lot of ways, Exile it's a short story, but it is a coming of age short story. So in a lot of ways, it is as expansive as a novel, but it is small. It's a short story. It's condensed. So it's they call it Bildungsroman, as they say in the German word. It's a coming of age story, and it uses literature, Caribbean and African literature, as frameworks for her thinking. So she's not interacting with people, but she's interacting with literature itself and seeing her life through a new lens, not actually understanding for the first time what is happening to her because of Chinua Achebe and Naipaul and poetry and Wordsworth and things that many of us of a certain generation read growing up in Caribbean schools. So I would say that is a story for the thinking of the all-encompassing, far-reaching nature of what is in these stories that maybe not everyone might see, but some people, if you have that background of knowing where these stories are coming from and understanding the legacy that I am inheriting a legacy. So this is what I do with my inheritance. And I write these stories in this particular way. That's all.
Okay. For the persons who are listening, who are, potential writers, persons who are considering, doing their own book, I mean, what advice would you give them based on your experience that they should just not overlook if they want to undertake something like this?
I mean, writing is work. Writing is work. Having a book is work. I would say, but the most important thing you could do is write. It's not easy to do all the time, but the best you can do is write and read. And again, there's so much room for different voices out there. You know what I mean? Don't let their heart faint. You write the story that you want to tell. You write it. There is a listener there. Somebody who is gonna hear it maybe for the first time. Maybe they may not understand it the first time, but eventually they will. And then you become like Gabriel Garcia Marquez is writing 100 Days of Solitude. He didn't wait to see what somebody else thought. Just write it. I know that there's a place for your voice, I would say, and I know that it is a lot of hard work. It was a lot of hard work getting stories ready to be published, and find, I guess, people other than who are related to you. If you can be in writing workshops, if you can be in places where you have critique, that's really super important, because you really can't hear yourself. You could write an entire story and realize you never even said the person's name. You know what I mean? Things like that, or you don't say where they come from. You don't know, because it's in your head. So I think finding ways to get critique is really important while you're writing, or at least having that experience of being able to workshop things with other people. That's helpful.
Okay. I mean, thank you very much for your words, man. We are all the better for your insights. Just like to wish you congratulations on your nominations. For where Book Fest is concerned. And again, by going through the book itself, I can appreciate your writings. And again, through the conversation, I can appreciate the effort that you put into it. And I know it's a good read, personally, from my experience as well. So all the best in your undertakings, and we look forward to the work that you're putting together next time around. And, hopefully it should be received with, if not the same kind of vigor, even more so.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you reaching out and having this, sharing this platform that you have here to get Caribbean literature out there. And I hope people, enjoy the conversation, and I hope they pick the book up and, feel a thing. So that's what I hope. Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
And that's a wrap on this enchanting journey into faith, love, and the secrets with the brilliant A.K. Herman. If you've loved The Believers, support more Caribbean voices by following TLC Tropical Literature Creators. Our goal is 500 followers in the next 2 months, and you can help us get there. Be in the know with TLC Tropical Literature Creators.